Okay, everyone. My name is, here's my face, Asia Atwood. We're going to be going over how to determine if you're flood exposed. I know there were some people that were interested. Let me just make sure I'm not on mute. Looks like I'm good. Yep. I know there were some people that were interested in checking this out and figuring out how to determine if you were exposed to flood. And this can be not just for your home, but for your business, for an investment property that you might be interested in, for a farm, for something that's really important to you. Like it could even be where your children are located, or the college that you might be sending your children to. Anywhere, you can look up the flood zones for anywhere in the United States, but you need to know how to read them properly. And then once you get access to them, what do you do with them? So I wanted to just briefly go over how to do it, and leave some information in the comments so that if people wanted to come back to this, check out the recording, you could do it at your leisure. If some people pop in while I'm doing it, great. But I figured let me at least record this and take advantage of the fact that I've already got this lit up. So this website that I'm showing you right now, in the left-hand corner, you can see it's FEMA's National Flood Hazard Layer. It's a specific viewer that they created that will use kind of like a Google Earth imagery, satellite imagery, and then they lay the floodplains over this map. So I like to use this because it's the best way visually to get an understanding of whether or not you're flood exposed. There are other ways to look up your flood maps as well. FEMA also has what's called their FEMA Flood Map Service Center. So I'll put links to both of these in the comments when I post this on Nubia, and I'll be putting this as a private on YouTube, a private video on YouTube, so that anybody can check it out. And then I'll post the link in Nubia so that you can check it out as well. So when you first load this website, FEMA's Flood Hazard Layer, a big blue pop-up will pop up on the screen saying, you know, giving you some information about the website. Do you want to see it every time? You can just click OK, X out of that, and get right into doing what you need to do. The first thing you're going to want to do is, depending on your location, you can type in a full street address, or you can type in a place. Some people were interested in Houston, Texas, because that is definitely an area that gets heavily impacted by floods. It could be, you know, just a lot of rain all of a sudden hitting that area causes tremendous issues downtown. But let me back up just a little bit for those that might be wondering, why am I talking about this, and what's my kind of background in this area? So for about 17 years, I've been in what's called the natural catastrophe risk engineering business. I trained and worked with some of the best insurance companies, large commercial insurance companies that underwrite these really expensive multi-billion-dollar companies. And they don't just you know, underwrite these companies. They actually send engineers out to the companies to determine if there's a flood, a hurricane, a hailstorm, earthquake, etc., what will happen to the company that they're underwriting, and what can we do to be proactive to mitigate or minimize the extent of that damage, because after all, the insurance company does not want to pay the claim. So I was an engineer that was trained as a mechanical engineer, but when I came out of school, I got into risk engineering, and I then specifically focused on natural catastrophes, so hurricanes, floods, hailstorms, etc. And worked not just for one insurance company, but wound up working for a couple of others and helping them develop their engineering standards, their engineering procedures, and training a lot of their engineers on how to evaluate these large multi-billion-dollar companies. So I wanted to use some of my my knowledge and give it back to the community, and just make sure that, because this is really valuable information that only the people who can pay for these large insurance premiums get access to. But we all need to know how to protect ourselves. So these FEMA flood maps are what some insurance companies use to determine their clients' flood exposures. And I say some because the FEMA flood maps are best guess estimates. They're not 100% accurate. They oftentimes, we find that during a flood event, a significant amount of damage happens way outside of these flood zones that I'm going to be talking about. So they're kind of like the best guess estimates. They're also supposed to be updated every 7 to 10 years. And the American Society of Civil Engineers, they're tasked with having the proper engineers on staff that are trained to go out and do new flood studies to figure out what the changes have been. And the floodplains will change over time as you build more roads, more buildings, paving out these large, taking down trees and grass and putting up these large shopping centers and these large malls. That changes what's called, it changes the topography. So when it rains, instead of the water hitting grass and trees and being kind of absorbed into the ground, it's now hitting sidewalks, pavements, roads, parking lots, and running down the street and accumulating and overtaking our storm and water drainage system. So the floodplains will change over time, and this can happen from 2 or 3 years down the line. And we only really supposedly update these every 7 to 10 years, and in a lot of cases we're significantly behind because they just don't have the manpower to keep up with the work. So one of the things that we'd like to do is we'd like to look at the flood map, look at the data of the flood map to figure out how outdated it probably might be. And we also like to go above and beyond outside of the flood zone. So I'm going to just go into an example with Houston, Texas, to show you exactly what I mean. So what I did is I pulled up this FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer. I typed in Houston, Texas, and I zoomed in just a little bit on this highway here, but let me zoom out. And I don't want to get too crazy because this website takes a little bit of time to load. As you can see, it's a little slow, and it's a lot slower when I'm doing zoom at the same time. So I don't want to get too crazy, but you can zoom in and zoom out. If you zoom way out, the entire window will show like red, all red, and you won't be able to see the detail that I'm showing you right now. So what you're going to want to do when you first start is you'll type in your location and you may not see anything, or you may see all red. Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, until you start to see these different types of shadings, this orange and these blue shadings here that are different types of flood zones. So make sure that you zoom in to get that additional detail. What also will pop up on the screen, so I'm zoomed into just a generic area in Houston. You can see that it's overlaying over, this is some sort of waterway that runs alongside the expressway. You got these kind of red and blue shading, and then you've got just blue shading, and you've got orange shading. So I'll talk a little bit about all of those. And then you can also see right here, this number, it says 48201 C0670M. That's the flood map number. So if you wanted to dig a little bit deeper, and there's a lot more information, this is just kind of like high level information that you're looking at here. There are like pages and pages, books and books of more detail that you can really drill down to figure out what the engineers did and how they kind of came to these conclusions, and to get more detail about the elevations of the flood, because it's great to know how far the flood will extend. Like, it's good to know that all this might be flooded, but how high will the water be? What's the flood elevation? What's the expected height of water? And you want to know that too, because you could have a basement, or you could have a first floor or second floor, and depending where you are located, where your business might be, or where your home and your valuables might be, you want to know, and I might be in a flood zone, but am I above the flood zone? That's important too. And you can drill down using the flood map information as well. And then it also gives you the date, effective June 9th, 2014. So we can see that this one is getting close to that time where it should be updated very soon. We'll see how long that might take. There might be a preliminary flood study that's in the works. There's ways to find that as well. But we may not get into all that for this recording. So we're looking at a highway, and you can see that there are different kind of zones. You've got these kind of wiggly lines crossing across the zones. And these are areas that give you just a little bit of information on the water elevation, how high it will be. But let me back up and explain the different color coding. So there are different types of flood zones. Back in maybe about 5 or 10 years ago, people used to use, and they're trying not to use these terms anymore because they're really not accurate, but people will talk about the 500-year flood, the 100-year flood, the 50-year flood, the 10-year flood. And all of these have different kind of zones and areas that they can extend to. So this orange area used to be termed the 500-year flood. And people used to think, oh, that meant that it would only happen every 500 years. Similarly, the blue area that says zone AE, that was also known as the 100-year flood. And people would think, oh, that's only supposed to happen every 100 years. That is not the case. These were terms that were kind of taken and misconstrued. What these really are now are called the 0.2% flood zone. So it's a little bit, more engineering, and I think maybe that's the reason why they went to the 500-year flood. But let me click on this, and hopefully this will act appropriate for us today. When I'm on Zoom, it never acts the way that it normally does when I'm not using Zoom. So I should be able to click on any location and a little window will pop up. Hopefully that will happen. You can also see, I can show you something similar over here, hopefully. The legend should pop up. If it doesn't, it's all good. I can still explain it off the top of my dome. So the orange areas here are what's called the 0.2% flood zone. 0.2% meaning every year there is a 0.2% chance that this area will flood. Sounds very low, but I will tell you that we're finding that these floods are happening a lot more often than what the percentages that are coming up. So if you were to click on this, you might see something that says 0.2% flood. That's also known as the 500-year flood, which means it's supposed to be the least likely flood plain that might occur. The blue area, zone AE, is called the 1% flood zone, which means every year there's a 1% chance that that area will flood. So orange, less likely, blue, a little bit more likely. But again, these are all estimates and they don't necessarily, it just takes a while to load, I guess. They don't necessarily happen exactly as these flood maps are saying. Their best guess, their estimates, their starting points. We're getting flooding more often than the 100-year or the 500-year flood might say, and you can look in the recent news and media and see that. So let me just scroll down a little bit so you can see this in written terms. I talked about the blue area is the 1% annual chance that a flood will occur. The little orange area is a 0.2% annual chance the flood will occur. How do they get to 100 and 500? Well, if you do 1 year and over 500 years, you get 0.2%. So 1 divided by 500 is 0.2. So it's a way of trying to do probability math. And then again, if you do 1 year over 100 years, you get 1%. So that's where the 1% came from. So here we go. It's finally popping up. This happens a lot faster when you're not on Zoom. So please don't think it'll take you this long to get this information. But you can see I clicked here, it popped up. Hopefully it will stay and it won't run away from us. But you can see it's the 0.2% annual flood hazard. So if you click in the zone, it'll give you a little bit of information on what the percentage of likelihood that the flood will occur. And they used to also give you, at least not for the 500-year, but for the 1%, for the 1% chance in blue, they used to give you the actual flood elevations right in this window. But depending on where you're located, you may or may not get that information. But what you can do is see, depending on the map and where you're located, you can see that they do give you a little bit of information on how high will the flood waters be. So let me close this window. And you can see these little black squiggly lines and then the number 39 right there. Again, you got another 39 right there. If you go out in this direction, there's another little 39 right there. That's 39 feet. 39 feet above mean sea level, or another datum that's called the NGVD datum. I won't get into all of that, the different types of datums. There's a history behind all of these. So basically it's saying 39 feet of water above mean sea level, plus or minus a few feet, depending on where you are geographically. So If you can determine, if you have this information, or if you want to have someone help you to get this information, and if you need help with that, that's a part of what I can do. But if you know the elevation of your house is at, 50 feet, and the flood water is going to hit at 39, you might be okay, even though you're in this flood zone, but you need to know those elevations. So the first step we do is we just figure out, are you even in the zone? Are you in, and to me, because things are so inconsistent in regards to the probability, I wouldn't get too wrapped up on whether you're in the orange or the blue. If you're in any of these flood zones, consider yourself to be flood exposed. You need to take some sort of, proactive measures to help to protect yourself, or to figure out how to, mitigate what's going to happen. Let me close this a little bit. You can also see that sometimes the floods span across bridges, or across, major roads and things. If you have a business that relies on access to and from the highway, you're trying to get supplies in and out, you want to know not just about where your plant or your building or your facility is located, you want to know about the roads that lead in to your facility, to find out, are you going to be impacted and not be able to deliver product, or have your employees get there, et cetera. So it's not just about where you're located, it's also about the roads, the access that you get, that get you to and fro. And you also should consider where your transformers and your power and the substations that supply power to wherever you're concerned about, where they're located as well. So you can move this map around, and can zoom in a little bit more and figure out, hey, I might be outside of a flood zone, but the transformer down the street that I know, the guy's been out there working. I'm always paying attention when someone's doing work out there, whether it be the Comcast, Xfinity, the power people. Pay attention to where they're working and what they're doing, so that you can kind of get an understanding of how, if something happens to that piece of equipment, it might impact you as well. So these are all things that you can consider. But the first thing is just to pull up the map, drill down, figure out if you're in a flood zone, and not just if you're in a flood zone. This is also important, because these things are just rough estimates, best guesses. You want to look outside of the flood zone. You want to look outside of the flood zone by about 2,000 feet. And we've had situations where people have had flooding. I mean, these areas out here, if I were to do an evaluation for a client, and there's a little measurement tool right here. I don't know how well it's going to work while I'm on Zoom. We'll see. So I'm going to measure in feet. Let's just pull over here and see. There we go. Thank you for working correctly. So because I'm still within 2,000 feet, and really you want to be, what's the closest area, like what's the closest flood zone from where you are? But because I'm zoomed in so much, basically everything that I see here is within 2,000 feet from a flood zone. So, it could be a factory or something down here, or something that's happening down here, a business of some sort that I'm evaluating, and they're outside of the flood zone, but no, they're too close. They're within 2,000 feet. We would treat them as flood exposed, and we would ask them to do some proactive measures and work with them to help them to do that as well. So just because you're not directly in the flood zone, if you're close, if you're within 2,000 feet of any flood zone, regardless of the color, any flood zone, please treat yourself as though you are flood exposed as well. And if you have the resources, the financial resources, go out and get flood insurance, because it's going to be crazy cheap. Because some of the smaller insurance companies that do just residential homes, now if you're talking about a larger commercial property, that's one thing. But if you're just talking about your house, you could probably get flood insurance for very cheap, even though because they don't have the resources, the engineering resources to dig deep like this. They're just gonna pull up a flood map in their system that's already kind of connected to all this based on your latitude, your longitude, and figure out, are you in a flood zone or are you not? They may not go above and beyond to figure out that you're 500 feet within a flood zone. So they're gonna charge you a very low premium. I'm gonna give you some favorable terms. But if you are in a flood zone, they're gonna charge you a lot more. So for example, when I lived, we just sold our home and moved, but we were about 200 feet outside of a flood zone. And I was able to purchase flood insurance for like $300 a year, knowing that the flood map was probably gonna be wrong. I'm only 300 feet away, and I probably need to worry about the fact that I'm gonna get flooded as well. So take a look into that. Another thing when you're thinking about flood insurance is ask for more information about if you have things below grade. Below grade means below the earth, below the surface of the ground. So in a basement. Most flood insurance policies, you can buy a flood insurance policy, but dig deep and look in there. Most flood insurance policies will not cover damage to things that are below grade. So that could be all of your contents, all of your storage, all of your, your irreplaceables, and to some extent, those things won't be replaced, and sometimes they can't be replaced. That also can include your water heater, your electrical, your gas furnace. Those things might not be covered because they're in the basement, and most people's have their equipment, most of your home's utility is in the basement. So you can go above and beyond. You can ask for below grade flood insurance. It'll cost you a little bit more. They don't really give you that much coverage depending on the company, but you have to ask, and some people don't even know the questions to ask. So I wanted to share this information with all of you. So I'll drop a link to this map here. If anybody has any additional questions, I know, if people were here, they might have some questions, and I might be able to dig a little bit deeper and help people out. But please comment and ask questions. We could try to do another one when people have more time to be present. I'm open to that. There's also this other link, that the FEMA flood map service. I haven't gotten into that much, but I'll drop it in there just in case. And then there's also the National Levy Database that I could get into as well. All of these things are available to the public. It can give you a lot of information on if you're flood exposed, and if you're protected by a levy, what's the state of the levy. And unfortunately, some of that information used to be public, and they pulled it out of the public view in 2019. In 2019, about April 2019 is when I found out that the National Levy Database actually took some of that public information off of their system regarding the quality of the levies. So they know that things aren't up to snuff. And they also know that these FEMA flood maps are just best guesses, and that things can really extend way outside of the flood zone. So please don't rely on just on insurance. If you can get it, especially if you have a business, don't just rely on insurance, because that's your livelihood, and that affects everything down the pipeline for you. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out in Nubia, DM me or email me at aja@trella.io. So I will put all of that. If you're in Nubia, you have a link to my profile. You can see my LinkedIn profile. You can even message me there as well. So thank you very much for checking this out, and hopefully people found some value in it. All right, everyone, Matt, peace, Matt, love. I'll catch you on the other side.